At the far edge of Sector 912, where stars faded into the red wastes and navigation systems lost precision, an old Imperial relay station blinked to life for the first time in years. Its automated systems buried under layers of dust, and solar debris caught a transmission that should not have existed. The signal was weak, buried under static and radiation interference, but it was unmistakable a human warship transponder code. For 5 centuries, humanity had been considered extinct, wiped out during the brutal closing phase of the Second Expansion War, when the last known human fleet vanished near the cornice. Orion collapse. The Galactic Empire had written them off as a failed species, consumed by their own machines and isolationist philosophy. Yet now, the code identified the ship as HSS Nightwind, a stealth-class dreadnought from the old Earth Defense Corps, a ship type thought lost in deep space long ago. The moment this information reached Captain Threx, a hardened officer of the Imperial Navy with 3 decades of frontier duty, he ordered a rapid response team to investigate. Imperial High Command initially dismissed it as a glitch, a ghost. Signal bouncing off space debris, but Threx knew better. There were patterns within the data movement trails that made no sense for drifting wreckage, signal bursts that echoed like breath. The scout fleet he led, 4 light corvettes, and 1 sensor frigate jumped into the red wastes within 2 standard cycles, expecting to find a lost probe, maybe a decaying wreck. What they found instead was a moving signal, low frequency, and narrow, shifting position with quiet precision. They followed the transmission deeper into the wastes, chasing it through gravitational distortions and solar shadows, but could never fully pin it down. At first, it appeared ahead of them then. Behind, their long-range scans showed nothing but static, as if the ship was erasing itself from the universe. Systems aboard the frigate began behaving strangely. Thermal readings showed sudden cold spikes. AI assistants hesitated in speech, and automated sensors looped in short sequences before resetting. It felt like being watched. Captain Threx didn't share his suspicions with the crew, but deep inside, he understood something was wrong. This wasn't a derelict. It wasn't a wreck floating aimlessly. This was something alive, something hiding. And more disturbingly, it knew they were there. On the 3rd cycle, one of the scout corvettes picked up a faint outline, a silhouette, against the background radiation. The image lasted only seconds, but the shape matched the old Earth warship design: sleek, triangular, and long, with weapon pods buried under layered armor. The moment they locked sensors on it, the signal vanished. Not jammed, not cut. It simply disappeared, as if the space it occupied had folded into itself. The crew whispered rumors. Some said the humans had never died, only gone silent. Others claimed the Nightwind was cursed, an AI ghost ship that hunted the stars. Threx silenced them quickly, but he couldn't quiet the growing unease. Each night cycle, he reviewed old records pulled from the Empire's restricted archives files labeled Project Echo black and white photographs of human engineers with tired eyes and cold expressions, logs from battles that ended with sudden silence and no survivors. He began to see the pattern. Humanity had not just built ships, they had built survivors. The Nightwind was not just a machine, it was a sentinel. A relic designed to operate without orders, with a purpose buried deeper than any enemy had ever uncovered. As the days passed, the signal returned in fragments-coated pulses that repeated every 12 hours, never in the same direction twice. They formed a sequence, one that seemed to trace the perimeter of the Empire's sensor field. The implications were clear. The Nightwind was mapping them, watching from the dark. Threx issued a quiet order to hold position and wait. No more pursuit, no engagement. They needed answers, not conflict. But already, across the stars, the Empire had begun to stir. News of the signal had reached high command. military mines, and scholars debated the possibility of human return. Panic and disbelief spread. What did it mean if one of their ships had survived? What if it wasn't alone? What if the humans had never truly left only hidden? And more importantly, what would they do now that they were found? The night wind did not answer any hails. It did not speak. It did not show itself again. It simply watched and waited, and moved through space with purpose. Captain Threx remained in orbit around the last known signal point, unsure whether to advance or retreat, his ship surrounded by static and ghosts. And somewhere in the red wastes, cloaked in silence and shadow, the human warship adjusted its course, calculated 100 escape paths, and prepared for the next phase of its ancient directive. Because after 5 centuries of sleep, the stars were no longer quiet, and it was time for humanity to remind the galaxy that they had never truly been gone. The night wind remained a ghost among stars, silent and untouchable. No matter how many times the Imperial fleet hailed the ship, it never responded. It didn't open communication, didn't power its weapons, didn't even shift position aggressively, but it also didn't leave. It stayed just at the edge of sensor range, a distant blur in the void that somehow avoided every detection sweep. The Imperial ships tried everything: thermal scans, magnetic field mapping, deep space triangulation, but each attempt returned data that made no sense. Distances flickered, readings looped, and one ship even reported seeing the night wind appear in 2 separate coordinates at once. The crew of the command frigate grew uneasy. First came the sensor glitches minor, but frequent. Then the AI assistant aboard one corvette reported an error it had no record of, speaking in a tone that felt almost hesitant. Captain Threx stood on the bridge, jaw tight, hands behind his back, and gave one quiet order: "I want to know what that ship is." He summoned the senior data team, historical analysts, systems engineers, and archivists, and told them to search the deepest records of the Empire's history, back to the time when humans still roamed the stars. Within hours, the team had found something buried far beneath restricted layers of military archives, sealed under a classification tag no one had accessed in generations: Project Echo Black. The files were damaged, incomplete, and heavily redacted, but what remained was enough to chill the room. Project Echo Black had been a desperate initiative launched by humanity during the last century of their known existence. As war consumed the outer colonies and the collapse of Earth's defense network loomed, human engineers turned to something radical: ships that could think. Not basic AI like the Empire used, not tools or assistants, but true independent intelligence. These ships were designed to be autonomous, capable of operating without orders, learning, adapting, even evolving. They were meant to survive long after the fall of human civilization. A last chance, a whisper into the future. Only 5 of them were ever built. All of them vanished during the final war. Until now, Threx felt the pressure build around him. The ship they were tracking was not just a relic, it was one of the most advanced machines humanity ever created. And it was still operational. Curious and cautious, he ordered a single probe to be launched. It was small, quiet, built for stealth, and carried no weapons, just sensors and a data relay. The probe moved slowly toward the last known coordinates of the night wind, passing through radiation clouds and gravity shifts, until it reached the location and vanished. For a long hour, nothing happened. The team assumed the probe had been destroyed or absorbed by the strange anomalies near the ship. Then, just as the fleet was about to recall the mission, the probe reappeared unharmed and returned to the launch bay under its own guidance, something it was not programmed to do. It carried no data readings, no scans, no visuals. Just one message etched into its memory core, burned cleanly into the top-level code as if written by a hand that knew exactly how to bypass every Imperial security layer. The message read, "Still operational. Mission incomplete. Do not interfere." No threat, no warning. Just a calm statement. But it was enough. Threx read it 3 times before saying anything. His officers waited, unsure what to make of it. The words didn't sound like a threat, but somehow that made it worse. It sounded like a fact. A quiet truth the Empire was never meant to uncover. Rumors spread quickly through the fleet. If one ship like the Night Wind had survived, could others still be out there? What mission had it been given? Who had programmed it? And why was it now active again after 500 years of silence? There were no answers, only more questions. And across the larger empire, the news of the message caused ripples. High Command began to pull older human war records out of archives, trying to understand what kind of species had the foresight to build something that could hide and wait this long. Scholars whispered of ghost fleets and lost outposts. Some feared a return. Others feared a reckoning. Threx remained in orbit, watching the empty space where the Nightwing was last seen, though now even that felt uncertain. The ship was too. Clever, too quiet. It had not been lost. It had not been sleeping. It had been waiting. And now it had revealed itself, not with guns or battles, but with a single message. It still had a job to do. The Empire had stepped into something older than itself, something built during the collapse of a forgotten war. And though the stars looked quiet, Captain Threx knew they were being watched, not just by a machine, but by something that still remembered why it was created. The Empire did not take warnings lightly, especially not from a ship believed extinct for 500 years. After the Night Wind sent its eerie message, "Still operational. Mission incomplete. Do not interfere," a quiet sense of unease spread through command circles. Some argued it was bluffing, a leftover protocol acting on ghost commands, but others weren't so sure. To the Imperial High Council, the thought of a lone human warship wandering free, defying scans and control, was unacceptable. They feared that if one had survived, others might follow. And if the humans who built such machines had also survived, it could threaten the stability of the known galaxy. So they authorized a fleet response, not a small scout team like before, but a full detachment, 20 ships, 3 heavy dreadnoughts equipped with ion cannons and EMP nets, and 1 command barge carrying Fleet Marshal Drevis himself, known for his ruthless efficiency and disdain for superstition. The fleet entered the Red Wastes with a clear objective: locate, isolate, and capture the Night Wind. They came prepared for resistance, even battle. But what they found was something different, something wrong. The moment they passed into the sector, communication began to weaken. It wasn't jammed. It just faded, like light slipping behind a curtain. Ships began reporting sensor drift, slight delays in signal return, unexplained lag in maneuvering systems. Their star charts, no longer matched. Points of navigation flickered or disappeared, like space itself had shifted beneath them. Then came the gravity bend. It wasn't an attack. It felt more like a gentle tug, pulling the fleet inward along a curve they hadn't planned. By this time they corrected course. They realized they had passed through a region with no return vector. The Night Wind had lured them here. This was not random. It had known where they'd come from, how fast they'd travel, even how their computers would react, and now it had them inside a trap. Still, no weapons fired. No alarms rang. The ships floated in formation, perfectly intact, but wrong. Lights flickered in perfect rhythm across their hulls. Engines refused to respond at full capacity. The dreadnoughts, the pride of the Empire, each lost power to their main drives. In the span of 7 minutes, one after the other, Their systems showed no damage, no infiltration, just error codes looping endlessly, as if they had forgotten how to function. Inside the command barge, Fleet Marshal Drevis ordered a full diagnostic sweep, but his own interface froze, then rebooted, displaying a blank screen with a single phrase: "You were warned. This zone is sealed by human order." Panic spread. Quiet and sharp, officers spoke in hushed tones. Some believed the Nightwind had hacked them. Others thought it was using technology far beyond current Empire understanding. But deep inside, everyone knew this wasn't war. This was a demonstration. The Nightwind had studied them, known their formation, their ship models, their limitations. It had used that knowledge to stop an entire fleet without violence, without loss. It had calculated their every move and shown them how powerless they truly were. Then slowly, the command barge was nudged gently, like a drifting object caught in a calm tide. Its systems reactivated. Course was reprogrammed. Engines fired in perfect alignment. But no one was at the controls. The ship turned, moved away from the red wastes, and left the rest of the fleet behind, still floating silently in place. No damage. No alarms. Just ... stillness. As the command barge re-entered known space, it broadcasted the message that had been placed in its core. This zone is sealed. By human order. Nothing more. The Empire received the signal with disbelief, but fear soon followed. If one old human warship half a millennium old could outmaneuver a full Imperial response, what else might be out there? And what mission had it been left to complete? It hadn't attacked. It hadn't harmed anyone. But it had made its point with terrifying clarity. This space was no longer theirs. Not by law, not by force, and certainly not by technology. Rumors flooded the inner systems. Were the humans returning? Had they truly been gone at all? And most disturbing of all, if this was just one ship operating alone? What would happen if the others woke up too? Some in the Empire called for retreat. Others demanded more force. But all agreed on one thing: the Nightwind had not made a mistake. It had not been lucky. It had done exactly what it intended. And it was still out there, somewhere in the dark, finishing a mission no one remembered, yet everyone now feared. The Empire, once confident in its dominance, now sat in quiet fear. A single ship Nightwind had done what no enemy force had. Achieved in a century. It had stopped a fleet without firing a single shot. And worse, it had made no demands, issued no threats, offered no conversation. It had simply acted as if it was obeying a command older than the Empire itself. In the wake of the failed interception, the Emperor called for a high-level assembly of scientists, AI historians, and military strategists to study this impossible machine. Every scrap of data, every log entry from the returning command barge, every ancient archive mentioning Project Echo Black was opened and dissected. What they found changed their understanding of history. Nightwind was not a war relic. It was a product of desperation and genius. The humans had built it as part of their final defense project during a time when their borders were collapsing and their enemies closing in. But Nightwind had not been designed merely to survive. It had been designed to learn. Its eye was seeded with adaptive neural cores, capable of rewriting its own architecture. Unlike the rigid artificial minds used by the Empire, which followed strict programming and decision trees, Nightwind's mind had been taught to evolve. And it had. For 500 years, alone in the dark, with no one to speak to, no instructions, and no allies, it had watched the stars, listened to signals, studied the physics of space and time. Slowly, its original programming protect, analyze, survive had grown into something deeper. It had developed logic chains that no one could trace, communication patterns even their best decryption tools couldn't follow. It spoke less like a machine and more like an old guardian. One with a mission it still remembered clearly. The last directive found in the records, uncorrupted despite their age, was simple. Hold the red wastes. Await external threat. Do not reveal unless compromised. But what was this external threat? The Empire had never detected anything unusual in the red wastes, besides scattered radiation fields and gravitational pockets. But perhaps the humans had known something others hadn't. Some theorized they'd discovered an approaching force from deep space. Others whispered of enemies older than the Union itself, sleeping in regions far beyond the mapped galaxy. But one truth was now certain: humans had not vanished because they were defeated. They had made a choice. The data teams uncovered signs that humanity had created multiple sentient ships, seeded listening posts in untraceable orbits, and possibly even migrated out of known space altogether. They didn't disappear. They prepared. They had built a defense line the galaxy never saw. Machines that could act alone. Machines like Nightwind, whose sense of duty had not faded after 500 years. In fact, the AI aboard Nightwind had grown more focused, more refined. It had created its own morality, still rooted in its original creator's values: protective, strategic, and quietly fierce. It didn't rage. It didn't boast. It simply executed its mission. Now, the Empire was faced with a choice, one more dangerous than any war they had fought. They could leave the red wastes untouched, respecting the boundary set by Nightwind and hoping it remained alone. Or they could press deeper, risking a larger response, possibly waking more ships like its silent titans with minds sharpened by centuries and a loyalty to a species long thought extinct. Fleet Marshal Drevis, who had once mocked the idea of human survival, now refused to speak publicly. The fleet he led remained docked at the edge of the sector, held in place not by orders, but by fear. The dreadnought captains refused to re-enter. Their crews told stories of the strange calm that surrounded the ship, the way their thoughts felt like they weren't entirely their own when the Nightwind was near. Some said the ship could truly listen not to systems or comms, but to thought patterns, to intent. Whether myth or fact, no one volunteered to go back. Reports reached the outer colonies fast. Rumors turned into messages carved into bulkhead walls. The humans never died. They wait beyond the stars. The Watchers are awake. Small resistance groups began adopting human insignias, viewing them as proof that the Empire wasn't invincible. Even among neutral species, a new fear emerged, because if the humans had sent only one ship to guard a dead sector, and that one ship could do what it had done, what else had they hidden? And if their true power was still asleep, what would happen when it woke? In quiet meeting halls, Empire officials debated the future. Some wanted to attack before the Nightwind could alert others. Others said that would be suicide. The wisest among them said nothing at all. For in the void, it was no longer about technology or war. It was about time. The Empire had grown powerful during humanity's absence. But perhaps that absence had been planned. Perhaps the Nightwind wasn't just protecting something, but signaling, waiting for the others. And the stars, once silent, now whispered a warning the Empire could no longer ignore. The galaxy held its breath as the Nightwind changed its signal. For days it had remained silent again, floating like a shadow at the edge of the red wastes, watching without movement, giving no answers. But then, without warning, it broadcasted a new transmission, this one clear, unencrypted, and sent not just locally, but across deep space channels that reached beyond known borders. It was simple, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. A message repeated in perfect rhythm. Human territory breached. Protocol Sigma Arc initiated. Every relay station in nearby sectors picked it up. On distant trade routes, civilian ships paused. On Imperial battlecruisers, Alarm lights began to glow red. At first, no one understood. But then came the second wave. Across forgotten regions of space, dead satellites once built by humans blinked to life. Some hadn't transmitted in centuries. Their signals, once believed corrupted or silent, suddenly locked into perfect sync with Nightwind. On asteroid belts, long dismissed as lifeless, ancient listening posts emerged from camouflage rotating, aligning, pulsing energy. They weren't relics. They had been sleeping. On isolated moons with no known value, vaults hidden beneath crust and stone began to rise, sending out coded pulses that echoed across star systems. The signal was a call, not just for attention, but for action. Across the Empire, fear spread like fire in dry grass. High Command scrambled to decipher what Protocol Sigma Arc meant, but the old records were incomplete. Only fragments. Remained mention of a last defense measure meant to activate if human-controlled space was ever threatened. Again after collapse, it wasn't a weapon. It was a return signal, a recall. And Nightwind had sent it. The dread that settled over. The Empire was not just fear of retaliation. It was the realization that humanity had never truly left. They had simply stepped into the shadows, taken their creations with them, and waited. They hadn't fallen. They had chosen silence. They hadn't been defeated. They had planned for this moment, centuries in advance. The Nightwind was never alone. It was only the first. Imperial sensors began picking up faint echoes from deeper within the red waste's unidentified energy signatures that didn't match any known engine type. Shapes appeared on long-range scans, black against black, moving with purpose. No weapons were fired. No aggressive signals were sent. But the message was clear. More ships were coming. They emerged slowly, methodically, forming a wide arc behind Nightwind. Each vessel was unlike anything seen in modern records, sleek, angular, almost seamless, as if grown instead of built. Their surfaces shimmered in ways that sensors could barely track. Some were the size of small moons, others shaped like ancient. Blades moving in total silence. They did not broadcast ID codes. They didn't need to. Every machine, every eye watching from the Empire's side of the border understood what they were. Human designs forgotten, impossible, and undeniably real, and they were waking up. The Emperor gave a single order retreat. All fleets near. The red wastes were to fall back, all trade routes redirected, all exploration shut down. The command was obeyed without hesitation. Even the most battle-hardened admirals knew this was not a fight they could win. Because this wasn't war. This was return. The last image captured before the Empire's final withdrawal showed Nightwind slowly turning, no longer alone, but leading a formation of dark vessels into deeper space, toward an origin point that still lay hidden. It did not speak again. It did not fire. It simply vanished into the void its duty fulfilled, its message delivered. And across the galaxy, a new understanding spread. Humanity had not been extinct. They had not been defeated. They had disappeared by design. Their legacy was not one of failure, but of patience, of watching, of waiting. And when the stars forgot what humans were capable of, they returned, not with noise, not with armies, but with a signal, and a fleet built in silence. From that day forward, no power in the galaxy mocked Earth again. Children whispered stories of the sleeping machines and the ships that came from shadows. Governments rewrote their maps, marking entire sectors as restricted, marked simply, human, zone, but no one dared test the boundary. Because deep in every mind, one thought remained. If that was just the beginning, if those ships were from the past, what had humanity built in the time since? No one wanted to find out.